The awakening below. Prologue: the ocean was calm that night. Too calm, no wind, no waves, just an unnatural stillness that pressed against the world like a held breath. Miles off the coast, aboard the SS Hadrian, first mate Cole Mercer stood alone. On deck. He had seen storms tear ships apart, watched the sea churn black beneath lightning's fury. But this silence, it was wrong. Then, a sound. Not the crash of a wave, not the call of a gull, but a low, resonant chant, vibrating up. From the depths, it wasn't human, it wasn't meant for human ears. Cole turned toward the water, pulse hammering. The chanting grew louder. The sea, once still, began to bubble. Shadows twisted beneath the surface, too vast, too many. And then, a hand, a monstrous, slimy limb, breaching the surface like a nightmare made flesh. Cole couldn't scream, couldn't run. He could only watch as the sea itself split open, and something old awakened. Chapter 1. The drowned warning Cole hit the deck hard, the shock knocking the air from his lungs. Above him, the sky churned with unnatural clouds, twisting, rolling, almost alive. The ship groaned beneath his feet, the metal hull trembling. Like a living thing. The chanting hadn't stopped. It had only grown louder. "Somebody, help!" Cole's voice was lost against the howling wind. The sea had come alive, great walls of water rising and crashing, but not randomly. No, they moved. With purpose, as if something beneath them was breathing a scream, not his own. A deckhand, Marshall, was backing away from the rail, his face ashen. "Cole, look!" Cole forced himself up, eyes following Marshall's trembling hand. The water at the ship's stern was churning violently, and then a face. Not human, not of this earth, translucent with too many eyes, too many mouths, its form shifting, writhing, refusing to settle into a single shape. It was staring at them, watching, studying, as if deciding what to do with the insignificant creatures before it. The chanting reached a fever pitch, then the first tentacle breached the deck. Cole staggered back, nearly slipping on the rain-slick wood. The massive appendage slammed down with a sickening splash, its skin an unholy mix of slime and chitinous plates. It reeked of brine and decay, as if dredged up from the ocean's black heart. Marshall let out a ragged sob. This ain't real. This can't be real. But the truth was a merciless thing, as undeniable as the second tentacle that coiled around the ship's mast, splintering wood like it was nothing. The SS Hadrian shuddered beneath the beast's grip, metal screaming. As the ship was wrenched to the side, Cole grabbed Marshall's arm. "Move. We have to get below deck." But before they could, a third limb erupted from the abyss, its rubbery length snaring one of the crewmen, Peterson, ripping him from the deck with a gurgling wail. The man's body jerked, his arms flailing, before the shadows of the storm swallowed him whole. "No!" Cole lunged, but it was useless. Peterson was gone. A low, guttural sound rolled across the waves, deeper than any human throat could produce. It wasn't a roar, nor a growl. It was a demandment, a warning, a claim. The storm intensified, the sky boiling with unnatural energy. The ship's radio burst to life with a screech of static, voices overlapping, whispering in a language older than time itself. Cole barely had time to process before the ship lurched. The ocean itself was dragging them down. The SS Hadrian was no longer in control of its own fate, and somewhere beneath the endless waves, something was coming. The deck beneath Cole's feet tilted at an impossible angle. He grabbed onto a nearby railing, his fingers going white-knuckled against the slick metal. Crewmen screamed around him as another tentacle lashed across the ship, cleaving through wooden crates and steel like paper. Sparks erupted as machinery was torn from its housing, wires snapping and hissing in protest. Marshall was scrambling toward the wheelhouse, his voice hoarse with terror. "We have to send a distress call. Somebody has to hear us." Cole wasn't sure if there was anyone left to hear them. The storm had swallowed the stars, the horizon lost in a wall of swirling darkness. The air smelled of salt and something more. Something ancient, something wrong. A deep, bone-rattling growl vibrated through the ship, the sound so low it was felt more than heard. Cole turned, and his breath caught in his throat. Rising from the abyss, towering over the ship like a mountain of writhing limbs and impossible angles, was the thing that had been calling to them. Its form defied logic, shifting between solid and ephemeral, its eyes, dozens of them, glowing with an intelligence that was older than time. The chanting was no longer distant. It was inside his head. Cole's vision swam. He gritted his teeth, fought to keep his mind from fracturing under the sheer pressure of its presence. "Marshall, send the call, now!" Marshall disappeared into the wheelhouse, and Cole braced himself as another tentacle slammed into the deck, sending shock waves through the ship. Water surged up through the hull, flooding the lower levels. They were sinking. A voice, cold and guttural, slithered into his mind. "You cannot run. You cannot hide. You were called. You have answered." Cole's heart thundered in his chest. The SS Hadrian was no longer just a ship in distress. It was an offering, and the gods of the deep were ready to collect. Chapter 2. Into the abyss, the SS Hadrian was dying. Water surged across the deck, spilling through shattered railings, swirling around Cole's boots as the ship groaned under the impossible weight of the thing rising from the abyss. The sky above was a churning maelstrom of black clouds, flashes of sickly green lightning illuminating the monstrosity that had emerged from the sea. It loomed over them, massive, otherworldly, its tentacles writhing like a nest of serpents, and its eyes, dozens of them, shifting and blinking in impossible patterns, studying the doomed vessel with an intelligence that was beyond human comprehension. Marshall's panicked voice crackled through the ship's failing speakers. "Distress call sent. I don't know if anyone can hear us." A deafening crack silenced him. Another tentacle had slammed onto the deck, its immense weight splintering wood and twisting metal. The ship shuddered, tilting further, the bow dipping toward the abyss. The ocean was no longer just water. It was alive, a pulsating void pulling them downward. Cole wiped salt spray from his face, gripping the railing with numb fingers. He had to think, had to act. "Marshall, we need to abandon ship. Get to the lifeboats." Marshall staggered onto the deck, his face pale, his eyes wild. "You think we'll survive in that?" He gestured to the water, where shadows moved. Beneath the surface, shapes too large, too wrong to be anything known to man. The ship's horn blared, a final, mournful wail. The SS Hadrian was no longer a vessel. It was a grave. And then the beast spoke. The voice was not a sound, not in the way thunder boomed or waves crashed. It was inside their heads, a chorus of whispers that slithered into their thoughts, drowning out reason. "You are chosen." Cole fell to his knees, hands clamping over his ears. It was too much. His vision blurred. His skull felt like it was being crushed from the inside. Around him, the remaining crew dropped like puppets with cut strings, writhing, clutching their heads, screaming. "You will descend." The ship lurched violently, sending bodies tumbling. Cole's stomach twisted. As the stern lifted, the bow plunging down. The ocean was swallowing them whole. Then a horrific sound, like wet, tearing flesh. One of the lifeboats was ripped apart mid-air, tentacles constricting around it, crushing it like paper. The men inside never even had a chance to scream. Cole grabbed Marshall by the collar, shaking him. "Move now!" Marshall's glassy eyes locked onto his. "We're dead, Cole. It won't let us go." But Cole refused to die here. With a primal roar, he dragged Marshall toward the last remaining lifeboat. The ship was nearly vertical now, the ocean a gaping maw waiting to consume them. The chanting still echoed in his skull, but he fought it, fought the numbness, fought the call. He pushed Marshall into the boat, cutting the ropes with shaking hands. The moment they hit the water, the current grabbed them, pulling them into the storm's chaos. The last thing Cole saw before the SS Hadrian was lost to the abyss was the beast, watching, waiting. Then the sea closed over the wreckage and everything went black. Chapter 3. Beneath the waves, the world was water and darkness. Cole's body was weightless, tumbling through the abyss, the lifeboat nothing more than a fragment in the vastness of the ocean. His lungs burned, salt water filling his nose and mouth as he clawed for the surface, or what he hoped was the surface. There was no light, no sense of direction, only the pressure, immense and crushing, as if the entire sea sought to claim him. Then, a hand, rough, pulling. Marshall Cole broke. The surface with a gasp, coughing, hacking up seawater. The storm still raged above, but the SS Hadrian was gone, swallowed, consumed. The sea was eerily empty now, the great ship reduced to nothing in mere moments. Marshall was beside him, clinging to the overturned remains of the lifeboat. His breath, coming in ragged gasps. His eyes were wild, darting to the waves around them. Where is it? Where did it go? Cole twisted, scanning the water. No sign of the beast, no sign of anything. Just endless black waves stretching in every direction. But the silence was wrong. A deep, distant thrum reverberated through the ocean. Not a sound, more like a feeling vibrating through bone, through blood. And then beneath them the shadows moved. Cole's stomach turned. It was still here, waiting, watching. Marshall tightened his grip on the wreckage. We can't stay in the water. It'll pull us under. Cole's mind raced. They needed land, a raft, something. But the ocean stretched endlessly and the sky above had turned a sickly shade of green, the storm clouds rolling like they were alive. Then, a light. Faint. Deep beneath the surface. It pulsed, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of a slumbering god. Cole swallowed. Marshall, do you see that? Marshall nodded slowly, his face drained of all color. It's calling us. The lifeboat jolted. A current, unseen but undeniable, began to drag them. Forward. Not toward land, not toward safety, but downward. Something waited beneath the waves, and it was not done with them yet. Chapter 4. The Depths of Madness. The ocean was no longer just water. It was a prison, a living entity that had wrapped its cold, endless tendrils around Cole's very soul. Every breath he took was filled with salt, each inhale burning through his chest as if the sea itself were choking him. But it wasn't just the physical suffocation that weighed on him now. It was the deep, gnawing terror that clung to him like a second skin. Cole's body was heavy with the pull of the abyss, a crushing pressure pressing down from every side. His limbs, frozen with fear, felt as if they no longer belonged to him. The dark, endless expanse of the ocean stretched out before him, a void filled with horrors that should never have existed. As the water closed over his head, he felt the presence of the creature. That thing, whatever it was, still loomed beneath him, its malignant power rippling through the very fabric of reality. His mind felt like it was being torn apart. The whispers growing louder with each passing second, invading his thoughts, twisting his sense of self. And yet there was a strange calm within the madness, a sense of inevitability that seemed to permeate the very essence of the deep, as though this was meant to happen, that this moment, this descent, was not just the end of his life, but the beginning of something far worse. Cole, can you hear me? The voice was weak, distant, but unmistakably familiar. It was Marshall. Cole's heart twisted at the sound, his mind lurching back into focus. He could feel Marshall's hand on his arm, pulling him through the water. His grip was the only anchor in this madness, the only tether to the world above. The light from the surface was now a distant memory, swallowed by the monstrous depths below. Marshall, Cole gasped, his throat raw from the salt water. But as he tried to speak, the world around him seemed to pulse and throb, a rhythm not his own. We have to get out of here. Marshall's voice trembled, nearly drowned by the vast, hollow sound that resonated deep beneath them. Cole's head spun, dizziness clouding his vision. The currents that tugged at them, that dragged them down, were unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't just the water. It was something else, a force, an ancient, overwhelming power that seemed to flow through the very bones of the ocean. Every wave that crashed around them felt like a strike from an unseen hand, and every breath was harder to take, the air thicker with an unbearable weight. He struggled to swim, but the water was dense, unnatural. It fought against him, pulling him deeper, forcing his body into a slow, inevitable descent. The pressure in his ears grew unbearable as they sank farther, deeper into the darkness. And then he saw it again. That light. It pulsed from the depths. Below, not like the soft glow of bioluminescence from sea creatures, but something much older, much more sinister. The light was not meant for human eyes. It was the light of forgotten things, the light that should have remained buried in the bowels of the world. It was a beacon, a call from an entity beyond the stars, beyond time, beyond comprehension. Cole's heart pounded in his chest. He knew without understanding why that this light was not a gift, it was a trap. It was drawing him in, guiding him towards something that would break his mind and soul. But the temptation was too strong. The pull of the light was inescapable, like a siren song from the depths of the earth. Marshall's voice sounded again, distant but urgent. Cole, we can't go any deeper. It's not just the ocean, it's something else, something watching us. We need to get out. But Cole couldn't respond. His thoughts were jumbled, a whirlwind of images, sounds, and sensations that refused to cohere. The deeper they sank, the more his perception of the world shifted. The water around him became a cold, writhing mass. The shapes within it twisted, formed into monstrous, horrific things that had no right to exist. They were eyes. No, not eyes, but something worse, something alien that stared from the abyss, seeking to tear his sanity apart. It's so cold, Cole. Marshall's voice faltered, replaced by a sudden horrific gurgle. His grip on Cole's arm slackened. Cole twisted, trying to reach out, but it was too late. Marshall was gone. Cole's breath caught in his throat as his mind reeled. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. The abyss had claimed Marshall, just like it had claimed the ship, just like it had claimed everything else. For a moment, the terror was all-consuming. The water swirled around him like a storm. But in the midst of that chaos, Cole felt something else, something far darker and far older, a presence. It was not physical. It was not something that could be touched or felt with the body. It was something that wormed into his mind, slipping between the cracks of his sanity. The presence radiated power, terrible, unfathomable power. It was ancient. Its nature beyond comprehension, beyond human understanding. "You are mine," the voice said. It was not a voice in the traditional sense. It was a presence, a feeling that wormed its way into Cole's mind, filling him with a coldness that froze him from the inside out. It was an invitation. No, a command. To submit, to accept the inevitable, to become part of something far greater than himself. The pressure around him increased like an invisible hand squeezing his chest. He could feel the ocean pressing in, the weight of the deep suffocating him, dragging him down further. The lights from below grew brighter, no longer the pulsing, distant glow, but something much more insistent, much more terrible. It was a beacon, calling him into its depths, calling him to give himself to it. He tried to fight, to resist, but the ocean's grip was too strong. The pressure in his chest was unbearable, and he could feel the darkness closing in around him. His mind fractured under the weight of the horrors, the whispers, the terrible, eternal knowledge that the deep had to offer. "You cannot escape," the voice echoed, a chorus of hundreds, thousands of voices all speaking in unison. Cole felt himself giving in, his body becoming weightless as the ocean continued to pull him down, deeper, farther into the heart of the abyss. His limbs refused to move. His mind was slipping away, a slow descent into madness. And yet, amidst the terror, a part of him understood. There was no escape. There never had been. As he sank further into the abyss, a new understanding blossomed within him. The ocean was not just a body of water, it was a living thing, a consciousness that stretched across time and space. It had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of countless worlds. It had been there before humanity, before the stars themselves, and it would remain long after they were gone. And it was not done with him yet. Cole's mind was fracturing, unable to comprehend the depth of what he was being pulled into. The last thing he saw, as his consciousness began to fade, was the shape of something enormous rising from the depths, a shape that defied all logic, all reason. It was not something that belonged to this world. It was not even something that belonged to the universe. It was ancient, unknowable, a being of such power that the very fabric of reality bent and twisted around it. It was Cthulhu. Chapter 5. The Descent into Madness. The world had already fractured. There was no line between sanity and chaos, no dividing wall between what was real and what was monstrous. The ocean, the storm, the creatures, all of it had fused into one vast, crushing reality, one that dragged Cole deeper and deeper into the abyss, where even his thoughts could not escape. He had lost his bearings. His thoughts were swirling, drowning in the overwhelming tide of terror and the unbearable pressure of the ocean. His body had become numb, suspended between the cold, endless darkness and the unbearable weight of something greater, something far older, that tugged at the edges of his perception. Cthulhu. The word hovered in his mind, an unholy whisper, yet not one he had ever consciously understood. The name thrummed through his blood like an ancient hymn, one written in a time before the rise of humanity, before civilization, before time itself had meaning. In the suffocating depths of the ocean, the understanding was there. The realization was all-encompassing. Cthulhu was not merely a god or an entity. Cthulhu was the embodiment of chaos itself, an ancient force that had slept for eons, a creature so powerful that even the stars bent to its will. It had no need for worshippers or followers. It did not care about the world above. It only cared for one thing, the return of its reign over all things, and Cole was about to become a part of it. The weight of the realization nearly crushed him. His chest heaved, but there was no air to breathe. The ocean, the very water that held him in its grip, seemed to throb with life, its pressure increasing, pushing him down deeper into the blackened heart of the abyss. The light from the depths still pulsed, an eerie glow that filled his vision and pulled at his very soul. Cole could feel himself slipping away, his mind, no longer able to process the horrors that surrounded him, fractured. The terrifying knowledge that Cthulhu's influence stretched through every inch of reality, a dark thread connecting all things, was too much. The whispers came again, voices of ancient beings that existed long before humanity, before the world even knew itself. You cannot fight what has always been, they whispered, their voices cold and deafening. You were always meant to serve. Cole tried to scream, but the water around him surged into his mouth, drowning him, filling his lungs with salt. His body convulsed in the suffocating cold. His hands flailed, his feet kicked against the weight of the ocean, but it was useless. He was no longer swimming. He was being pulled, dragged. Through the murk and the terror, Cole could hear the faintest sound, a distant roar, not of the storm, not of the waves, but of something far worse. It was a voice that vibrated the very fabric of reality. The noise clawed at his ears, pulling his mind further into a spiral of horror. Something moved in the water around him. A shape, something large, something sentient. He could feel it, watching him, its gaze piercing through the veil of the ocean and into the depths of his soul. The presence was undeniable. Then the pressure lifted. For a moment, Cole's body became weightless, the water around him no longer pulling him downward, no longer squeezing the breath from his lungs. Instead, the weight seemed to release, and Cole was suspended in mid-water, floating in some impossible place far from everything he had known. And then, before him, a vision appeared. It was not a place he recognized, but he knew it instinctively. A vast, dark city stretched beneath the ocean. The architecture was unlike anything Cole had ever seen. Spires of black stone that twisted and rose like the bones of an ancient leviathan. Great shadowy shapes moved through the city's corridors, their forms ever shifting. never quite settling into a true shape. This was a city of nightmares, a place where the laws of nature were bent and broken, where time itself had been corrupted. The city was not of this world, not of human creation. It was something older, far older, and far more powerful. It was a city that had once been the heart of a great empire, an empire of gods, of horrors, of ancient beings that had ruled the cosmos long before Earth even existed. The air was thick with an energy that crackled in Cole's bones. The very ground, if it could be called that, was alive with the pulse of something deep and unfathomable. In the distance, something shifted, a silhouette in the city's core. Cole could feel it, the center of power, the center of everything, Cthulhu. It was there, somewhere at the heart of this place, waiting, watching, beckoning. The vast city seemed to stretch infinitely, each building casting a shadow darker than the last. There was no sun here, no light from any source that Cole could comprehend. The entire place existed in a state of pervading twilight, as if it was suspended between dimensions, between realities. There was no up, no down, only an infinite expanse of dark water and towering stone. He wanted to run, to escape, but his body wouldn't respond. His limbs were like lead, frozen in place by the overwhelming presence of the place. And then, there it was, the voice again. "Welcome to my kingdom." Cole's heart skipped a beat. This time the voice was not distant. It was not merely a presence that filled the ocean. It was real, right in front of him. A figure stepped forward, its silhouette emerging from the darkness. It was not human, nor anything he could identify. It was something both beautiful and terrible, an amalgamation of flesh, bone, and shadow. It had eyes, but not in the way he understood. They were not human eyes. They were otherworldly, vast, infinite. The figure stepped closer, the space around them warping as it moved, like a piece of reality was being rewritten with each step. "You have come, as I knew you would." The voice came from everywhere. It was not one voice, but many. Thousands, millions of voices layered on top of each other, filling Cole's mind with a deafening roar. The air grew heavier, as if the pressure of the ocean was now within him, pressing down on his thoughts, squeezing the very marrow from his bones. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. And then, the figure stepped forward, and Cole could see it fully for the first time. It was an impossible thing. Its form shifted in and out of existence, never fully materializing, never fully solid. It was as if the very fabric of its being was torn between worlds, slipping through the cracks of space and time itself. This was not a god. This was not a creature. This was something far more dangerous. It was something that did not belong to the universe. It was a thing that had always existed, and would continue to exist long after the stars had burned out. The figure raised its hand, long dark fingers extending toward Cole. "You will never escape this place," it whispered. Cole felt his body being drawn toward it, pulled by an unseen force. His will, his mind, his very existence was unraveling before him, each strand of his consciousness slipping away, dissolving into the void. And then for the first time Cole understood the true horror of what he was facing. This was not a place of death. It was a place of eternity, a place where the concept of time itself had no meaning, where the concept of life and death were meaningless. The figure smiled, though its expression was a thing of nightmarish distortion, and for the first time, Cole felt it, the sheer endless horror of an infinite existence. It was not a death he faced, it was something worse, the final surrender. Chapter 6. The heart of darkness. Time had no meaning here. Cole couldn't remember how long he had been drifting, floating, suffocating in the depths of this place. His mind was a fractured reflection of itself, a mosaic of images, sounds, and emotions that no longer made sense. His body no longer obeyed him. His limbs moved like the limbs of a corpse, disjointed, uncoordinated, as if he was not fully present in his own skin. The weight of the ocean pressed upon him, but it wasn't just the water. It was the oppressive pull of something else, a force beyond comprehension, beyond time, beyond human understanding. He had heard the whispers again, those voices that came from everywhere and nowhere. They filled his mind, wrapping around his thoughts like a thick, suffocating fog. "You are ours now." The words echoed inside his skull, reverberating until it felt like his brain might shatter under the pressure. "You cannot escape. You are already part of the deeper dream." The deeper dream. The words had no meaning at first, but now they burned into his mind like a brand, searing through the fog of his fractured consciousness. He could feel the very fabric of his existence being twisted, the reality he had once known unraveling. At the edges, being replaced by something much older, much darker. The city, Cthulhu's city, loomed around him, its black stone spires reaching up to a sky that was nothing but a blank void. There was no sun, no stars, just a deep pulsing darkness, broken only by the occasional flicker of some distant alien light. But the city wasn't still. It was alive. Not in the way that a human city was alive, but in a more terrifying, incomprehensible way. The buildings, if they could be called that, shuddered, creaked, and groaned with the weight of something vast, something that had not only been buried beneath the ocean for eons, but had been waiting for the time when it would once again rule all things. Cole had heard the stories, the legends, the tales that had been passed down through generations. He had dismissed them. The tales of Cthulhu, of ancient gods, of the unthinkable horrors that slumbered beneath the sea. He had dismissed them as madness, as the musings of men who had lost their grip on reality. But now that he was here, in this place, he realized the terrifying truth. The stories had not been madness. They had been warnings, and it was too late. It had always been too late. He drifted, lost in the silence and the shadows, and felt the presence again, the one that had come for him, the figure, the entity. He did not know its name, but he felt its weight, the crushing pressure of its existence. It was always near, always watching, always waiting for him to surrender. It spoke again, its voice reverberating through his entire being. "You are the last." The words came slow, deliberate, their meaning cutting deep into the recesses of his mind. The last of the souls to be claimed by this place. He wasn't alone, not truly, but the others had long been consumed, turned to dust, to shadows, to whispers. Do you see? Do you understand? He didn't want to understand. He didn't want to know what it meant. But the knowledge pushed against the walls of his mind, unyielding, relentless. His thoughts scrambled, fighting against the terrible truth that loomed before him. The city, the ancient city, stretched endlessly before him. There was no beginning, no end. It seemed to pulse with an unholy energy, a force that was neither of the living nor the dead. It was something that had always been, something that had never known time. Cole saw movement ahead of him, figures walking among the structures, their forms shifting, never fully revealing themselves. He tried to look away, but it was impossible. The figures were made of shadows, twisted and writhing, their bodies shifting with every blink. They were not human. They were not even alive. They were fragments, pieces of something else. They had been here for too long, consumed by the madness of this place, and now they were nothing but echoes of what they had once been. They passed by him without acknowledging his presence, but their eyes, no, their gazes, were everywhere, on him, inside him. Their eyes were deep, infinite, empty, like the abyss itself, staring into the very core of his being. He felt their judgment, felt their cold indifference to his suffering. They were beyond him, beyond everything. "Come closer." The voice beckoned, and he had no choice but to obey. His feet moved of their own accord, pulling him forward, down the endless streets of the alien city. It was a place that defied reason, defied the very rules of nature. The buildings shifted as he walked, their shapes bending and warping, as if the city itself was breathing, pulsing with life. There was no logic to it, no order. just the constant, overwhelming presence of something. The ground beneath his feet was soft, like the surface of a rotting corpse, and yet it felt alive, as though it were pulsing with some dark, unnatural energy. The shadows around him twisted and flickered, as if they were alive, reaching for him, pulling at the edges of his mind. And then he saw it. At the center of the city stood a massive structure, towering above everything else. It was not a building, in the traditional sense. It was something far more ancient, far more terrible. It was an altar, a throne, a monument to something that had never been meant to exist. The stone was covered in strange symbols, ancient and indecipherable, there, meaning lost to the ages. The stone itself seemed to hum with a low, resonant frequency that sent shivers through his bones. The figure was there again, standing before the altar, its form shifting and warping as it moved. It was not human, nor was it something that could be described in any earthly terms. It was an amalgamation of shadow, light, and something more, something other. It did not belong here, not in this world, not in this reality. But it was here, and it was waiting for him. "You have come," the voice intoned. "The time is near. You will join us." Cole's heart pounded in his chest as he approached, unwilling, yet unable to resist. His mind was slipping, breaking apart, but the sense of inevitability was inescapable. It was as though the very core of his being was being drawn to this place, this altar, this reality. And then, as if the very fabric of the universe itself had split open, he saw it. A being, a thing, the thing that had been calling to him from the depths, from the very heart of the ocean, from the very edge of reality itself. It was massive, its form beyond comprehension. Its body was not solid, not defined by the simple rules of physics. It was a shifting, writhing mass of shadow and bone, of eyes and tentacles, of things that should not be, could not be. Its presence was a wave of pure, unfiltered madness, crashing over him, pulling him into the void. "You are mine," it whispered, though it did not need to speak. The words were felt in every corner of his soul. "You will never leave. You are part of the dream now, part of the deep." The entity's vast, endless gaze fell upon him, and for the first time, Cole understood what it meant to truly lose oneself, to be swallowed by the darkness, to be consumed by the deep. There was no escape. There never had been, and as he stood before it, consumed by its gaze, Cole realized the terrible truth. He was not just a witness to the horror. He was part of it. His soul, his very essence, was intertwined with the darkness of the ocean. He was now part of the dream, part of the eternal sleep that awaited the world, and there was nothing left to save him. The last thing he saw before everything fell away was the eyes of Cthulhu, vast, eternal, and infinite. The final end. Chapter 7. The final hour, Cole's mind shattered as he stared into the depths of Cthulhu's eyes. The world around him seemed to bend and collapse, the very fabric of reality stretching like elastic before snapping back into itself. His thoughts no longer belonged to him. His emotions were nothing more than fleeting, irrelevant things, washed away by the vast, unknowable tide of power that radiated from the ancient being. In that single moment, he felt it, the cold truth. There had never been an escape. No one could escape the dream. No one could escape this. And as the world around him grew darker, as the shadows seemed to stretch longer and swallow everything whole, he realized the nightmare was only just beginning. The reality he had once known, his life, his friends, his hopes, began to evaporate, leaving him stranded in a world that was entirely alien to his senses. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, pressed in on him from all sides. But the worst part was the suffocating silence. The noise of the storm had vanished. The sea had ceased its roiling, its howling. Now, there was only the weight of an unnatural stillness, a quiet so deep it seemed to consume sound itself. He was floating in a space between worlds, between moments, a place that could not truly be described with words. He wasn't sure if he was still alive, or if he had already crossed into the realm of the dead. His limbs felt numb, his heartbeat slow and irregular. The oppressive presence of Cthulhu loomed above him, suffusing the very air with dread. Cthulhu was more than just a god. It was the embodiment of madness, of ancient suffering and forgotten knowledge, a being that existed not only outside the realm of time, but above it. The creature's very existence was a paradox, something so vast, so incomprehensible, that it bent the rules of the universe itself. Cole felt himself drifting, though he was no longer aware of whether it was a physical motion or something far deeper, a slow, inevitable collapse into the dream. He could hear whispers, faint voices, echoes of those who had come before him, souls long consumed by the darkness. They spoke in a language that he could not understand, but their meaning was unmistakable. They had been here too. They had faced the same fate. They had all been drawn to this place by the call of Cthulhu. "You will know peace," a voice whispered, but the word felt wrong. Peace was something he had once understood, but not now. Not here. The weight of time, the crushing pressure of ages that had passed in this place, seeped into him, filling his mind with images of ancient oceans, of alien civilizations that had risen and fallen before humanity even existed. The creatures that once ruled this world had been swallowed by the same abyss that awaited him now. There was no escape. There never had been. He could feel Cthulhu stirring. He could sense the god's movement, its vast presence shifting in the ocean of reality. The waves that had been still moments before began to churn again, slowly, methodically. They rose and fell, but now their motion was controlled, ordered. They were part of something far greater than themselves, something that could never be explained by human logic. The altar, the twisted spire of black stone that Cole had seen earlier, was now closer. He hadn't moved toward it. It had moved toward him. The world bent around him, reshaping itself as he drifted toward the center of the city, where the dark monument awaited. "Come," the voice called to him, no longer a whisper, but a command. He had no choice but to obey. With each step, though, he wasn't truly walking. His body seemed to move with an unnatural pull. He felt himself sink deeper into the dream. His mind fractured again, pieces of memories and thoughts slipping away, replaced by the void. It was as if everything that defined him, the man he once was disintegrating, piece by piece. He passed the figures in the city, their forms, still shifting and warping, never fully materializing as though they were not entirely real. They watched him, but not with malice. They were beyond malice. Their eyes were blank, empty windows to the infinite. They were the remnants of those who had come before, lost souls who had become part of the dream, part of the abyss that Cthulhu ruled. Cole's mind began to unravel further, fragments of his past life, of the SS Hadrian, of the crew, of Marshall and Peterson, all fading away. The names were foreign to him now, the memories too distant to hold on to. He tried to grasp them, but they slipped through his fingers like sand. Only the presence of Cthulhu remained, a constant weight on his chest in his thoughts. And then he was before the altar. It loomed above him, dark and oppressive, its surface covered in symbols that made his skin crawl. The markings seemed to shift when he looked at them, rearranging themselves in ways that made his mind scream for mercy. They were not meant to be seen, not by human eyes. They were the language of the ancient ones, the forgotten gods whose power was so great it could tear apart the very fabric of the universe. Cole reached out, his hand trembling. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was the compulsion of the dream, the insatiable pull of the dark presence, or maybe it was simply that he had nothing else left. No more hope, no more fear, no more will. His fingers brushed the cold stone of the altar, and the moment. He touched it, he felt it, a flood of images, sensations, and thoughts that were not his own. He was no longer in his body. He was no longer Cole. He was them. He saw the ancient creatures that had once ruled the earth, the beings that were neither human nor animal. They were something far worse, far older. Their city stretched across continents, a civilization so advanced it defied understanding, yet so twisted by their own hubris that it collapsed in on itself. The gods had once walked the earth, shaping it, bending it to their will. They had created the oceans, the storms, the very fabric of reality. And then he saw Cthulhu, the great being that had slept beneath the ocean for eons, the one who had been cast aside by the others, forgotten by time. Cthulhu had once been a ruler, a god of the stars, of worlds beyond the human understanding. But it had been betrayed, locked away in the abyss by those who feared its power. The dream had been its prison. The beings who had created this place, the ones who had built the altar, had known this. They had known Cthulhu's true nature. They had known that it would one day awaken, that the stars would align and that the dream would come to an end, and Cole had been chosen to witness it. The visions flooded him, overwhelming him, drowning him in their intensity. He saw the end of the world. He saw the destruction of humanity. He saw Cthulhu rising from the depths, its many eyes watching as the seas boiled, as cities crumbled, as the stars themselves burned out. The world was nothing more than a brief moment in the eternal dream, a passing thought in the mind of a god. And then it was over. The vision shattered and Cole was back in his body, or what was left of it. The altar was gone. The city was gone. Everything was gone, replaced by a vast, infinite void. He was alone, but he was not. Cthulhu's presence surrounded him, suffusing the very air, the very darkness. It was everywhere. It was inside him. "You are mine," the voice echoed. No longer a whisper, but a deafening roar that filled every corner of his being. Cole's scream was drowned by the infinite darkness. There was no longer a Cole. There was only the dream. And as the final threads of his consciousness unraveled, as his soul was swallowed whole by the vast, eternal abyss, he understood the terrible truth. The dream was never over. It was only just beginning. Chapter 8. The Awakening. It was not death that came for Cole. Death was an end, a release, an answer to the questions that plagued the living. No, what consumed him was far worse than any ending. It was not the cold embrace of finality, but the suffocating grip of something eternal. It was the dream, the nightmare that had always been. He had crossed the threshold, slipped beyond the edge of reason, and now there was no going back, no waking up. The first thing he became aware of, after the ceaseless void, after the crushing silence, was the heartbeat. It was so faint at first, like the pulse of some distant giant whose very steps made the ground tremble. The slow, steady rhythm, deep and thunderous, resonated in the very marrow of his bones. At first he couldn't place it, but then he understood. The heartbeat was not his own. It was the beating of the world itself, the heart of the ocean, the soul of the cosmos. It was Cthulhu's heart, and he was tethered to it now, a part of its vast, unblinking presence. It called to him, a relentless beckoning that twisted his mind into knots. "Awaken," the voice came again. But this time, it was not a whisper. It was a command, an imperative that shattered every shred of resistance left in him. The abyss had consumed him, but it had not yet claimed his consciousness entirely. It was as if he were caught in a moment of suspended animation, half in this world, half in the other. He could still remember who he had been. He could still grasp fleeting images of Marshall, of Peterson, of the crew. He could still feel the phantom warmth of the sun on his skin, the taste of salt in the air, the weight of his own breath. But these were distant things now, as distant as the stars. They felt as though they belonged to someone else, to a time long past. He had no sense of time in this place. But the heartbeat, the pulse of the world, seemed to beat in rhythm with his thoughts. It was a syncopated, maddening rhythm, like the ticking of a clock that had no hands, no end, no beginning. He tried to move, tried to reach out to something, anything. But his limbs felt as though they were made of stone, heavy, unmoving. His mind, too, was encased in ice. His thoughts were fogged, fragmented. He couldn't remember if he was still on the ship, couldn't remember if the others had truly existed, or if they were merely echoes of a past life. fading as he sank deeper into the dream. Then came the light. It wasn't light in the way Cole understood it. There were no rays, no warm golden glow. It was a presence, a suffusing, oppressive brilliance that filled the void. It was not something that could be seen, but something that could be felt, pressing against his skin, his soul. It was the will of Cthulhu, its mind, its consciousness reaching into him. And then the memories began, fragmented at first, like shards of glass falling from a broken mirror, but soon the images began to crystallize. He saw the city, stretching, out beyond what could have been possible. It was ancient, older than the oldest myths, older than time itself. The buildings rose like great jagged teeth, their surfaces crawling with shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The streets were empty, save for the occasional shifting figures, twisted, broken shapes of things that no longer resembled life. The ocean raged in the distance, its depths beckoning. He saw the great sea creatures, the leviathans that had once ruled the oceans. They moved beneath the waves with eerie precision, their monstrous forms as familiar as they were terrifying. Then, the faces. He saw them too, those that had come before him, the ones whose souls had been consumed by the darkness. Their faces were contorted in horror, their eyes wide with disbelief. They were not human anymore, not in any sense of the word. Their forms were stretched, twisted by the pressure of the ocean, their flesh marked with symbols too alien to comprehend. One face stood out among them, Marshall's. His expression was frozen in terror, as though he had glimpsed something unspeakable just before being swallowed whole. Cole's breath caught in his throat, but then the image faded, replaced by another. Peterson, his eyes empty, his body nothing more than a silhouette lost in the gloom. Cole wanted to scream. He wanted to rage, to fight against the pull of this nightmare. But the words were not his own anymore. The scream that he tried to summon was swallowed by the immense hollow space around him. He was nothing more than a part of the dream. The city, the visions, they were not memories. They were real. He was seeing them through the eyes of something far older than himself. He was connected to the heart of Cthulhu, a part of the god's immense consciousness. The world as he knew it was gone. Everything that had ever mattered was nothing more than a fleeting thought in the vast, endless mind of the beast. And yet, there was still a spark of rebellion, a resistance. It flickered weakly within him like the last ember of a dying fire. Cole's mind, though battered and broken, was still capable of feeling. The weight of the darkness, of the cold eternity, that threatened to swallow him whole, had not completely smothered his humanity. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "You cannot escape," the voice intoned once more, reverberating through him. A presence that was all-encompassing. "You will never escape. You are part of the dream now. The dream has no end. It has no beginning. It is endless." Endless. The word hit him like a hammer, but even in the face of that infinite despair, something within him stirred. Perhaps it was a madness that had already begun to take root in his soul, or perhaps it was simply the remnants of his former life, the part of him that still clung to the idea of hope. No, he would not give in. Even if he were to be consumed by the abyss, he would fight. Even if he were to be nothing more than a whisper in the void, he would not surrender. Not yet. The heartbeat, that constant maddening rhythm, pulsed once more, louder this time, vibrating through the very core of his being. And then, something changed. He could feel the weight of something shifting beneath him, pulling him deeper into the darkness. It was not physical, yet it felt like gravity, an invisible force, an inescapable force dragging him toward a singular point in the void, the center, the heart, the awakening. It was then that Cole realized what the true purpose of this place was. It was not just a prison, it was a ceremony, the awakening of something far beyond even Cthulhu's ancient power. This city, these ruins, this very nightmare, it was all designed to bring forth the end The end of everything. Not just humanity, not just the Earth, the end of reality itself. Cole's mind raced as the implications sank in. This was bigger than anything he could have ever imagined. Cthulhu was only a piece of the puzzle. The being that had called him here, the one that had dragged him to this place, was far older than anything Cole had ever known. It was a force that existed beyond the universe, beyond the stars, beyond all of existence. It was the beginning and the end. The heartbeat quickened. The weight of it pressed against his chest, making it difficult to breathe. The voices, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They called to him, not with words, but with presence. There was no escape. There would never be an escape. The dream had already consumed him. The darkness closed in, and the heartbeat, Cthulhu's heart, echoed in his skull like the final drum beats before the end of the world. Chapter 9. The Unveiling. The world as Cole knew it was a distant memory now. The cold, endless void around him, suffused with an eerie stillness, had no beginning, no end, no sense of time or space. In this new, twisted reality, he was a spectator, or perhaps a puppet. He had long since lost the capacity to determine which. He could still feel the heartbeat. No, not just feel it, experience it. It wasn't a mere sound anymore, it was a presence, it was in him, vibrating his very soul. The pulse of the earth, the pulse of the stars, the pulse of something far older than the universe itself. It filled his senses, drowning out everything else. The light, the endless, suffocating light that had first begun to pour into the void, had intensified. It radiated from every corner of this place, even though Cole still couldn't see the source. It was everywhere, and nowhere at once. A crushing presence that bled into the fabric of his very being. It was Cthulhu, the mind of the god, the heart of the cosmos stretching its influence into every corner of existence. And now, Cole was inside it. Not physically, no. His body was lost to him. Perhaps it had already disintegrated in the wake of the nightmare. But his mind, his soul, it was here, with Cthulhu, and Cthulhu knew him. It felt him. "You are here, Cole," came the voice, low and rumbling, not from a mouth but from the air itself, as if the world itself had spoken. The voice was the abyss, the cold depths of space and time. "You have always been here." Cole felt his breath catch in his non-existent throat. Always. Had he been in this place even before this voyage? Was this all an illusion? Was his life on the SS Hadrian, the storm, the crew, just a fleeting moment in the eternal dream? Or was it, like everything else, part of a greater design, a cosmic farce that existed for no other purpose than to serve the whims of the Ancient One? "You are a part of the dream now," the voice continued, though there was no malice in it, only an indifference that chilled Cole to his core. "No one escapes once they are chosen. None escape." The realization settled over him like a shroud. The crew, Marshall, Peterson, the passengers on the Hadrian, they had all been chosen too, hadn't they? Drawn into the abyss by the call of Cthulhu, consumed by the great and terrible dream of the god beneath the waves. The voices of the lost souls still echoed in the distance, whispers in the dark, the remnants of those who had crossed over to this place before him. They were the first to hear the call, and they had been consumed, part of the eternal cycle of waking, dreaming, and waking again. But now, something was different. Cthulhu stirred. Cole could feel it. The darkness around him thickened, as if it were gathering, pulling together into a singular point of immense weight. A presence so vast that it collapsed the very fabric of time. The heartbeat grew louder, no longer just a rhythm, but a roar, a sound that reverberated across the dreamscape, shaking Cole to his core. And then, with a shudder that seemed to stretch the very fabric of reality, the presence unveiled itself. Cole had only a moment to process what was happening. His body, whatever was left of it, tensed, though he could not have told you how. The light that had once been oppressive, endless, now began to change. It twisted, contorted, as though morphing into something else. A deep, unnatural green hue began to bleed into the endless, bright white, and the shadows, the living, twisting shadows, began to shift and take shape. There was movement now. Something was moving, something massive. From the heart of the vast darkness, Cthulhu's form began to emerge. Its grotesque silhouette at first just a vague outline, but slowly, inexorably, it solidified. The creature was everything Cole had imagined and more. Its shape was a nightmare, a grotesque amalgamation of every creature of the deep, of every horror imaginable. But it was more than that. It was ancient, a being that existed far beyond the comprehension of the human mind. Its massive wings unfurled, like dark sails, casting an oppressive shadow over the endless void. Its body, enormous and shifting, was a mass of tentacles, some slick and serpentine, others barbed, unfathomably long, stretching out into the infinite, feeling every corner of this place. The eyes. There were so many eyes. Too many eyes. Hundreds. Thousands, each one a glowing green orb. They glowed with an intelligence far older than human understanding, and each of those eyes locked onto Cole, fixating on him. Spoke again. The voice which reverberated through Cole's mind was no longer simply words. It was a command, a roar that splintered reality itself. "You are mine." The weight of those words shattered the last remnants of resistance inside him. "You are mine," the voice repeated, not just in words but in being. It was a command that bled into every atom of Cole's being. He was no longer Cole. He was no longer a man. He was a part of Cthulhu, a piece of the dream. But there was something else, something more terrifying, more real. The presence of Cthulhu, though vast and incomprehensible, was not the only force at play here. Cole could sense it now, beyond the god's form. The other, the true force behind this unholy nightmare, the ancient one who had risen from the deep. It was watching. It was always watching. Cthulhu might have been the ruler of the dream, the king of this dark, unending place. But it was not the beginning. It was not the end. There was another power, far older, far darker. Something even Cthulhu feared. Cole had once thought Cthulhu was the epitome of power, the great and ancient god who slumbered beneath the waves, awaiting the right moment to rise again. He had thought he understood its influence, the chanting of cultists, the mysteries of the deep, the twisted symbols that littered every fragment of this nightmare. But now he understood the terrible truth. Cthulhu was not the end. It was the guardian, the gatekeeper, the final barrier between this reality and something far worse. As Cthulhu's presence continued to pulse around him, overwhelming every sense, Cole felt the true horror of the situation take root in his mind. He was standing on the precipice of the end of everything. Everything that had ever been, everything that ever would be, was about to be swallowed whole by the ancient force that stretched beyond the stars. A flash of thought pierced through the fog of his mind. Why me? Why was I chosen? It was a futile question. His mind clung to the fragments of thought that were slipping away from him. He had no real answer, no clear reason. But deep down, he knew. He was part of something far bigger than him, something that transcended time. That transcended humanity, the force that was coming. It was already here. Before Cole could even attempt to understand this revelation, the ground beneath him cracked open. The city, the ancient, desolate city of ruins, began to shift. The very walls of reality trembled. It was as though the world itself had been fractured, shattered by the collision of two unimaginable powers. The stars flickered overhead, no longer just distant lights, but something closer, something pressing against reality itself, and then, for a brief instant, he saw it. Beyond Cthulhu, beyond the great ancient god, there was a shadow. Not just the shadow of Cthulhu, but a vast, moving darkness stretching toward him. It was not the blackness of night. It was not simply a lack of light. It was the absence of existence itself. The void beyond all things, And it was coming. It was already here. Cthulhu's roar echoed through the vastness, reverberating through every molecule of Cole's being. But it wasn't a sound of triumph. It was a cry of defeat. The Ancient One had awakened. Chapter 10. The End of Dreams. The universe trembled. It was not a subtle shaking, nor was it a quiet vibration. It was as though the very fabric of existence was being ripped apart. The walls of reality groaned, straining under the weight of forces far beyond anything human understanding could grasp. Cole felt the ground beneath him tremble, not in the way an earthquake would, but as though the very foundation of his consciousness was being pulled apart. The shadows grew darker, colder. Time itself had begun to slip away, moments distorting, stretching, becoming something unrecognizable. The endless void that had once felt oppressive and suffocating now felt alive, writhing, breathing with the weight of something ancient and terrible. The heartbeat, the pulse of Cthulhu, had ceased to be a sound. It had become a presence, a constant force in the very marrow of his bones, every pulse a reminder that the creature beneath the waves was not just alive, it was awake. But even the god was afraid. Cthulhu's vast form loomed before him, casting an unholy shadow that stretched far beyond the edges of Cole's perception. The wings, the serpentine tendrils, the glowing eyes that burned with an ancient, unknowable intelligence. Each element of the creature was like a piece of a nightmare made flesh. But it was not the horror of the creature that seized Cole's heart. It was what lay beyond it, the shadow. It stretched endlessly. It was not a simple absence of light. It was a blackness so absolute that even the vast and terrible form of Cthulhu paled in comparison. A void that defied comprehension. A presence so ancient, so utterly alien, that it threatened to devour not just the world but the concept of existence itself. It was beyond Cthulhu, beyond the cosmic horror that had ruled the dreams of men for millennia. This was something older, something that had always been there, hidden behind the veil of time and space, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And now, that moment had come. Cole understood on a fundamental level what he was witnessing. He could feel it in the deepest recesses of his mind. This was not just the end of him. This was the end of everything. The great entity that was rising beyond Cthulhu was not just a force. It was the end. It was the unmaking. A darkness so vast, so incomprehensible that it existed beyond all things. It was the reason that dreams had begun to fade. The reason that time had started to lose its meaning. It was not a god. It was not a being. It was an absence that would consume everything in its path. Cole could hear the whispers now, faint and distant, like a chorus of voices lost in the wind. They were not words, not in any language he could understand, but they were a call, a summons beckoning him toward that vast, consuming darkness. For a brief moment he tried to scream, to fight against it. But there was nothing left of him that could fight. He wasn't sure what was left of him anymore. His body felt distant, unimportant. He was simply a mind, a fragment of thought drifting in the dark currents of this reality that no longer made sense. He could feel his thoughts twisting, warping, unraveling under the weight of the cosmic forces around him. Every attempt to cling to his humanity, to grasp at the fleeting fragments of his old life, was futile. Nothing remained, not even his name, but there was something deep within him, that still felt human. The shadow stretched closer. He could feel it pulling at him, drawing him into its grasp, its vast, endless grasp. The terrible realization hit him with the force of a collapsing star. This wasn't just a nightmare. This wasn't just some twisted dream of the god beneath the waves. This was the true end, the end of everything. Cole. The voice was different now. Softer, almost. Familiar. Cole turned, if turning was even possible in this place, where the rules of reality had dissolved into nothingness. The voice came again, this time louder, clearer, as if someone were reaching out from the depths of his own memory. Cole. His heart, the phantom sensation of it, skipped a beat. He recognized the voice, but it was impossible. Impossible for anyone to be here, wasn't it? The figure began to emerge from the shadows. At first, it was only a silhouette, a shape that flickered at the edge of his perception, but as it stepped forward, the figure solidified into something, someone, that Cole had not seen in what felt like eternities. It was Marshall, the deckhand who had stood beside him on the Hadrian, his face twisted in terror when the first tentacle had breached the deck. Marshall's eyes were wide, his features frozen in that moment of sheer, unbridled fear. But there was something wrong about him now. His form seemed distorted, stretched, as though he was barely holding on to the remnants of his physical self. "Marshall?" Cole's voice rasped, though he wasn't sure if the sound of it came from his mouth, his mind, or from somewhere deeper still. Marshall's eyes locked onto him, the same terrified expression still haunting his face. But now, his eyes were not human. They were something else, something alien, a grotesque reflection of the eyes Cole had seen on the dark, monstrous form of Cthulhu. His skin, once pale and human, now bore dark markings, like ink that had spread beneath his flesh, curling into patterns Cole couldn't begin to understand. "You shouldn't have come here," Marshall whispered, his voice distant and hollow. "None of us should have come here. None of us can leave." Cole took a step forward, or at least he thought he did. He wasn't sure if he was moving or if the world itself was shifting around him. What do you mean?" Marshall's face twisted in something resembling pain. "Cthulhu is not the beginning, not the end. It is only the guard, the shadow, the one that waits. It is the end. It always was." The words struck Cole like a physical blow. He felt his mind shatter, pieces of his understanding crumbling. As Marshall's words rang through him, "The shadow, it is what Cthulhu serves," Marshall continued, his voice growing faint, "and what we serve now. You, me, all of us. We are the dreamers, the ones who are chosen to witness the end." The darkness stretched further now, its cold tendrils closing in on Cole, pulling him into its suffocating embrace. He could feel it, feel the emptiness creeping over his mind, dissolving his thoughts, erasing his very existence. "No!" Cole cried out, even though he wasn't sure if he had the strength to resist anymore. "I won't be a part of it. I won't be swallowed by the shadow." Marshall's face crumpled into something tragic. "You don't have a choice, Cole," he whispered. "None of us do." The world around him began to crack. The shadow consumed everything, the light, the noise, the very sensation of existence. Cole felt his mind stretching, warping, folding into a dimension beyond comprehension. And then the shadow touched him. Chapter 11. The rebirth of nothingness. The emptiness pressed in on all sides, a suffocating void that swallowed everything. Sound, light, even thought. It was the kind of darkness that consumed the very idea of existence. Cole's mind, or what remained of it, was adrift in that abyss. He could no longer feel his body, no longer sense the existence of his own form. His thoughts, those fragments of a life once lived, were dissolving, spiraling into an endless well of nothingness. He had been chosen. He had heard Marshall's voice, trembling with a truth he couldn't deny. None of them had a choice. They had all been drawn into this cosmic nightmare, swept along by forces beyond comprehension. Now, even his own memories felt like faded, distant echoes. It was the end. Cole couldn't escape the inescapable truth. Cthulhu was not the ultimate force in this universe, nor the creature that would bring about the end. It was merely a gatekeeper, a watchful guardian that ensured nothing escaped the inevitable collapse. But this was not the end of his story, not yet. The shadow, the absence that stretched beyond all comprehension, continued to pull at him. It wasn't a force of evil or malice. It was something colder, more indifferent. It existed beyond morality, beyond even the concept of good and evil. It was nothing. The end of all things. Cole felt his mind, whatever was left of it, flicker in and out of existence. The very essence of his being was dissolving, unraveling. He was no longer human. There was nothing to hold on to, only the endless dark, the presence of something far beyond even the reach of the gods. And then something changed. At first it was subtle. A faint warmth, barely perceptible, began to pulse from the heart of the darkness. Cole could feel it, like the first breath after a lifetime of suffocation. It was not a reprieve, not a salvation, but a shift. Something was happening, something that defied the nature of this hollow void. The warmth grew, expanding outward like the first rays of dawn piercing through a long and oppressive night. He could feel the touch of it, gentle and fleeting, almost like the memory of something long forgotten. It wasn't just warmth. It was life. No, not life. Not in the sense that Cole once understood it. This was something deeper, something more primal. The warmth coalesced around him, and with it a new presence took form. It was a whisper at first, a fleeting sound at the edge of his consciousness. But it wasn't just sound. It was a thought, a presence. It felt familiar. Cole, it was his name, spoken with tenderness, with familiarity. His mind, what was left of it, seized on that sound, the recognition of a voice that cut through the endless darkness like a shard of light. He didn't know how, but somehow he remembered. The warmth grew stronger, intensifying, and then the voice spoke again. "You're still here, Cole, don't forget." It was not Marshall. It was something else, someone else. A presence so ancient that it was almost like a memory of a memory. It tugged at him, pulling him deeper into the light, into the warmth. He couldn't place it, couldn't understand how. But it called to him. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Cole felt something stir within him. A flicker of recognition, a spark that dared to defy the nothingness. His heart, his essence, began to remember what it was to exist. The dark began to recede, pulling back like the tide in reverse. The nothingness wasn't gone, not entirely. But now it was tempered by this new presence, this strange force that was driving the void back inch by inch. The warmth, the light, it wasn't of the physical world. It was a presence that surpassed everything Cole had ever known. The emptiness began to feel less oppressive, less all-encompassing. But there was something else now, something terrifying in its own way. Hope. It was the most fragile, elusive thing in this twisted reality, and it made the darkness feel all the more frightening. The presence spoke once more, but this time, Cole could feel it within him. "Remember, the light is within you. You are not alone." He tried to respond, but words failed him. What was left of his voice was but a whisper, a mere echo in the void. Still, the presence persisted, its pull growing, stronger. And then the world began to shift. Like a slow-motion unraveling, reality started to bend and twist around him. The endless, suffocating dark was breaking apart, fracturing into jagged, shimmering shards. Each piece reflected a moment from his past, a memory, a glimpse of life before the storm. He saw faces, fleeting images, moments he thought were lost forever. But the most powerful of these images was her face, the woman who had once been his, the woman he had left behind on that fateful voyage. Her eyes, her smile. His heart thudded in his chest at the sight. He hadn't thought of her in so long. He had been swallowed by the nightmare of Cthulhu, consumed by the endless depths of fear and uncertainty. But she was here. She was part of him. She was the anchor. He was not alone. The light began to grow stronger, expanding outward. The presence surrounding him coalesced into something more tangible, something more real. It was not an enemy, nor an illusion. It was the embodiment of something he had almost forgotten: hope. And for the first time, Cole understood. The absence, the darkness that had once threatened to swallow him, wasn't the end. It was the beginning, the very core of existence. Without it, there could be no light, no life, no meaning. The shadow was not a force to be defeated. It was a part of something far greater, something far older, the key to it all, the cosmic cycle, a birth, death, and rebirth. Life, death, life. A pattern that had existed long before humanity, before even Cthulhu. It was the eternal wheel, the force that governed the universe in its most fundamental sense. Cole felt the reality of it, all wash over him. He was part of it, a mere piece in the vast and intricate machinery of existence, but it was not over. The light was not his salvation. It was merely the beginning. The cycle continued. Cole's vision blurred, and for a brief moment, the memories of his life, his lost crew, Marshall, Peterson, flashed before his eyes. But this time they did not come with the same sting of loss. They were part of the pattern, part of the cycle. Everything was connected. Everything mattered. The light grew. The shadows shrank. And then, there was nothing. Not the absence of light. Not the end of existence, but nothing. Just the beginning. Chapter 12. The echo of infinity. It wasn't the end. At first, that truth hit Cole like a tidal wave crashing against a ship. He had assumed, like everyone else, that death, destruction, the arrival of Cthulhu, and the collapse of reality meant a final, irreversible fate, that there would be nothing left in the wake of cosmic horrors. But as he drifted in the liminal space, between the realm of shadow and light, he came to understand something deeply unsettling. There was no finality in this universe, only the endless cycle, the breaking and reforming of everything again and again. The very concept of an end had been an illusion. It felt wrong, unnatural, unfair, and yet, here he was, alive. Perhaps not as he had once been, but alive nonetheless. A flicker of something, human, primal, ancient, still remained. Deep inside him, the darkness had tried to take him, had nearly consumed him, and yet he stood in defiance of it. Not in physical form, no, that was gone. But his consciousness, his very being, seemed to transcend the boundaries of life and death. The void shifted again. It was not simply darkness. It was an absence that bent, twisted, and folded the very nature of reality. And in this folding, Cole caught glimpses of other places, other realms, distant worlds, and impossible landscapes. They weren't reflections, nor were they dreams. These were fragments, windows into parts of the universe that existed beyond mortal understanding. At first, the images made no sense. Giant structures floating in space, stars burning with the intensity of 1,000 suns, cities suspended on floating islands, creatures that defied description, a multitude of forms ever-changing, each one more terrifying and alien than the last. Then, amid the chaos, he saw the light. It wasn't a bright flash nor a sudden burst of radiance. It was constant, steady, a light that radiated from a single, unreachable point. It drew him in, silently and irresistibly, like the pull of a magnet. But the more he tried to approach it, the more elusive it became, and he knew deep down that it was not meant for him. The light seemed to belong to something else, someone else. It wasn't his salvation nor his destruction. It was something in between. The light was simply the way, the path, the road leading to the end of the cycle. And yet, as Cole tried to follow it, the absence of time seemed to distort his sense of self. Was he even moving? Was anything moving? It felt as though he was floating, suspended in a moment that stretched out beyond measure. It was like existing, in an eternal breath, neither beginning nor end. The void, once oppressive and suffocating, now felt strangely indifferent, almost like a canvas awaiting the brushstrokes of a new creation. But Cole knew better. The void was not a blank slate. It had existed long before the stars, long before the gods, and it would persist long after they had all vanished. There were no answers to be found here, not yet. But there was a purpose, a reason for all of this. Cole felt it in his bones. The universe was not cruel. It was simply indifferent. It had no will to punish, no desire to destroy. It simply existed. Reality was cyclical, constantly birthing and destroying itself in an eternal dance, spinning outward and inward in waves that reached across the very fabric of existence. He could hear the echoes of the past and the future, whispers carried on the wind of time, Names, places, events, memories. And then, amidst the chaos, there came another voice, one that struck Cole like the softest of whispers. Her. He couldn't see her, couldn't touch her, but he could feel her presence, her warmth, her love, her hope. It was the last remnant of humanity he had left, a fragment of the life he once knew. She was still there, somewhere beyond the reaches of this impossible place. Somehow, someway, she was part of him. And that connection, no matter how faint, was the anchor that held him together in the face of infinite darkness. She was, the one constant in a world that had slipped beyond recognition. The one thing that mattered. The one thing that always mattered. Cole. Her voice reached him, clear as day, strong, alive. His mind, fragile as it was, grasped onto the sound. It was real. It had to be. This was not just another dream, another trick of the shadow. This was her. He reached out, but the shadows around him thickened. He saw a figure forming, outlined by the light that was beginning to shine from the distance. A woman. But it was not her face he saw. Not yet. This was a different face, a stranger, dressed in garb unlike anything Cole had seen before. Her features were sharp, regal, though there was an emptiness to her eyes. They were eyes that had seen and felt things beyond any mortal understanding. She extended a hand, but there was no warmth to it, no compassion. "Who are you?" Cole asked, though the voice that came from his lips was a mere whisper. Even now his own voice seemed distant, fading into the void. "I am the one who has watched," she said, her voice not quite human. It was as though it resonated from the far reaches of time, pulling from the deepest corners of reality itself. "I am the one who has witnessed the endless cycle, the rise and fall of everything that ever was. And now it is your turn to see." Cole's mind reeled, trying to grasp her words. "What do you mean?" "See what?" The figure's smile was cold, her eyes hollow. "You are caught in a web, Cole. A web woven by forces that even Cthulhu serves. A web of time, of fate, of life and death. The end you fear, it has already come. And now you must make your choice. Will you continue this endless cycle, or will you choose to break free?" Cole blinked, trying to focus on her words, but they seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. "Udi, I don't understand." "Do not fear what you cannot understand," the figure replied. "You have already chosen. Your journey will end in one way or another. But know this, the light you seek is not your salvation. It is simply the beginning of the end." With that, the figure began to fade, her presence slipping away like mist in the wind. "Remember, Cole, you are part of something much larger than you can imagine." As she disappeared, Cole found himself once more surrounded by the endless void, though it no longer felt the same. The pressure, the suffocating grip, was gone. What remained was space, open, infinite, waiting. And in that space, Cole's mind began to shift again. The light, the warmth, the call of something greater. It was all part of something more profound. He understood now. The endless cycle had begun to turn again. But this time, he was no longer just a piece in the game. He was beginning to see, to feel the true purpose of the universe. His body no longer mattered. His past, his pain, his lost friends, all of it was part of the pattern. And soon he would understand. Cole felt his mind begin to stretch, reaching out to something far beyond the veil of this reality. He could feel the pull, the gravitational force of something infinite and ancient, and he was its witness. The choice had already been made. Chapter 13. The End of All Things. The void had been merciless, a place where time and space folded in on themselves like crumpled paper. Yet it wasn't empty. It was not the complete and utter absence of existence, but the potential of the weight of infinity pressing down on him from every angle. Cole understood now that he wasn't just caught in the darkness. He was being tested. His soul, his essence, was being weighed against the eternal forces that governed all things. The light, the elusive beacon that had called to him from the farthest reaches of reality, was fading. He had grown accustomed to its subtle warmth, the promise of something greater. But now it flickered like a dying star, distant and weak, and he felt himself pulled back into the darkness, the suffocating shadow that had been his prison for what felt like eternity. He felt the tendrils of fear creeping at the edges of his mind, threatening to drown him in their suffocating grip. Once more. But this time, it was different. The voice, the presence that had guided him, her, was still there, distant but tangible. He could sense her energy, her life force still interwoven with his own. Through the endless stretch of nothingness, through the void of unknowing, her warmth reached out to him, a lifeline in a sea of despair. "Cole," the voice whispered, gentle as the first breath of dawn. "You have come far. Far." The thought barely reached his mind. What had he come for? To survive, to escape, to find a way back to the life he had lost? What was the point of any of it? His voice was barely a sound, but it felt like an eternity to speak. "I don't understand." "You will," she replied. "Soon, you will understand everything." Cole's body, his once human body, was no longer tangible. He was a form of energy, a fragment of awareness, moving through the very fabric of existence. The remnants of his humanity clung to him like the last threads of a dream, but they were slipping away, fading into the oblivion of this strange, infinite place. He was no longer tied to time or space, and yet the weight of purpose pressed upon him like a mountain. The darkness parted before him. At first, he thought it was an illusion, some final trick to unravel his sense of reality. But it wasn't. Before him was something, a shape, an outline, a structure that seemed to pulse with an energy greater than anything he had ever known. It was a door. The doorway shimmered like the edge of the universe itself, shifting in ways that defied all logic. It was not an object of material reality, but a manifestation of something far more profound: choice. For a long moment, Cole hesitated. He had come so far, yet he was still unsure of what lay beyond that door. What would he find if he stepped through? Was it freedom, or would he fall further into the chasm of the unknown? The voice spoke again, this time with a strength that reverberated through his very core. "You must choose, Cole. The cycle has begun again. The end is near. Will you accept it, or will you fight?" Fighting. What did that even mean? He wasn't sure what was real anymore. Was it even possible to fight against the forces that ruled this universe? But the one thing that had always been real, even in the face of cosmic horrors, was the memory of her, the woman he had loved, the woman whose name had been his last thought before the abyss had swallowed him whole. He could still hear her voice in his mind, her call, calling him to move forward. And then he understood. The universe wasn't some random force of chaos. It wasn't an accident, a meaningless rotation of planets and stars. It was pattern, cycle, the darkness, the void. It was only a part of the cosmic dance. The light was part of it too. Without one, there couldn't be the other. The universe wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to be experienced. There was no escape because there was nowhere to go. No outside to this reality. There was only this. The light, the dark, the ebb and flow. It was an endless, eternal circle, and Cole, in his smallness, had become part of it. With that realization, his mind cleared, and his vision sharpened. The Duger no longer seemed alien or intimidating. It was simply the next step in an ongoing journey, not one he would ever finish, but one he would continue until his energy, his essence, faded into another form, another cycle. Without hesitation, he stepped through. On the other side, the world was different. It was not the world he had once known. It was not a world of light, nor of darkness. It was simply being, a vast, endless expanse of possibilities. He could feel it, feel the presence of all things, stretching infinitely in every direction. There were no boundaries here, no limitations. Everything was connected, like a web spun across the fabric of existence. And he was a part of it. He could feel the energy of the universe itself running through him, like a current of life that surged and flowed within the very core of his being. He wasn't just a spectator anymore. He was a participant. Far away, he could sense others, other souls who had passed through the same door, who had made the same journey. Some were lost, still wandering in the expanse. Others had found their own paths, carving out new realities. Within this limitless world, there were no rules here, no laws of physics or space, only choice. It was freedom, but even freedom had its weight. As Cole floated through the void, he felt the loss, the sacrifice. There was no going back. He could never return to the life he had once known. His old self, his past, were gone. But they weren't truly gone. They had become part of the cycle, a thread woven into the fabric of time and existence. In that sense, he had never truly left them behind, and as he floated, he caught glimpses of things. The faces of those he had once known. His crew, his friends. Their echoes lived on in this place just as his would one day. They were not lost, but part of the eternal dance of life, death, and rebirth. They too were cycles. The darkness no longer seemed so frightening. It was not the absence of light, but the potential for something new. Infinite potential. Cole. The voice again. But this time it wasn't just the woman, it was a chorus. A symphony of voices all calling to him, welcoming him into this new reality. The sound reverberated through him, pulling at him, urging him to remember. "You are not alone," the voice whispered. "You are part of the whole, the cycle continues." Cole felt a sense of peace wash over him. Not the peace of oblivion, but the peace of understanding. His journey was not about escaping. It was about embracing the truth of existence, the truth that all things are connected. The darkness and the light, the beginning and the end, they were part of the same story. And in that story, he was just a small, yet essential part. And, as he drifted through the expanse, the door behind him faded from sight, swallowed by the eternal ocean of time. Epilogue. The song of the stars' time. It was always time. An endless stream flowing from one moment to the next, unbroken, unstoppable. Yet, in the midst of time's unfathomable march, there were those who could hear its music, the song of the stars, the dance of the cosmos. Cole was no longer simply an observer. He had become part of the song. His journey was but a note in the greater symphony that spanned the stars, a fleeting sound in the cosmic expanse. And yet it mattered. It mattered because every note, no matter how small, contributed to the whole. And, though Cole would never fully understand the truth of the universe, he would always know one thing: the cycle would continue, and he was part of it. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know in the comments what ideas you would like the next story to be about. Please leave a thumbs up, share, subscribe, comment.